Welcome to Rose Island here at Charlestown State Park. To tell the story of Rose Island, we first have to go back to the 1880s when this park was first opened as Fern Grove. Fern Grove started out as a basic picnic destination for local churches and folks in the community. It was a very simple park with only 3 major additions, including a dance hall, a dining hall, and a small hotel. The park was very popular, at least for a couple of decades. But at the turn of the century and the opening of Fountain Ferry in Louisville, Fern Grove saw a drop in its admission, and eventually the park was put for sale. Everything changed in 1923 when David Rose became the new owner of Fern Grove. Right away, he reinvented the park, such as the name Rose Island. That name is a bit of a mystery to us, as Fern Grove was not an island at all. There are many stories to explain why he named it an island, but we may never know the truth. One possible story as to why David Rose called this Rose Island was marketing. An island sounded exotic, sounded exclusive, and perhaps separated itself from Fern Grove because no one called it an island. If you zoom in on a map, you can kind of call it a peninsula, with the Ohio River bordering one side and 14 Mile Creek wrapping around the other too. However, it's not an island at all. But Mr. Rose did limit access to the park. The only way you could come here was by boat or by crossing the swinging bridge across the lagoon. Another possible explanation was that Mr. Rose wanted a liquor license for the park. By calling it an island, that would make it part of Kentucky because the state line is on our side of the river. By being part of Kentucky, that then would allow him to have obtained a Kentucky liquor license for the park. Of course, if you know history, you'll know that when he bought the park in 1923, we were in Prohibition, and no state or county was issuing liquor license at that time. Additions included a carousel, a roller coaster, ponies that the kids could ride, a small zoo, and even rowboats to take up the Rose Island Lagoon, now known as 14 Mile Creek. All of these additions made this once again the destination for people in the local area, and business boomed. At least for a while, until the stock market crashed and we have the Great Depression. Business declined tremendously, although people still came, not in the numbers that they saw before. Eventually, of course, things would get better, and Mr. Rose saw an opportunity to expand the park. Future additions were to include a golf course, as well as other attractions, although David Rose never gets the opportunity to see that, because in January of 1937, it begins to rain, and it continues to rain for days upon days. We're left with what is seen as the most devastating flood ever to see this region, the Great Flood of 1937. And at that point, Rose Island was lost to history. The Rose Island Amusement Park provided a place to get away from it all for people during the early 20th century. The wide variety of games, rides, and overall amusement atmosphere offered a great family outing and opportunity for recreation. The 118-acre property was full of things to do. Access across 14 Mile Creek today is over a new walking bridge that was installed in 2011, but that bridge has its own history. Originally built in DuBois and Daviess County, that bridge crossed the White River. It was an iron construction bridge. Iron was only used for about a decade, and thus making it a historic feature in itself. We actually removed the bridge from its original site and brought it here to Charlestown, where it was restored and rebuilt on location, and during that process, less than 10% of the original iron had to be replaced. Although in its original state it was a bridge for vehicles, today it is a walking bridge, giving visitors access to Rose Island, but it will never be the same as when you had to cross the swinging bridge. The swinging bridge seemed to be an attraction in itself. Oftentimes we heard stories of boys crossing the bridge and bouncing and jumping on it, getting it moving and shaking to scare the girls so they would not cross it. The bridge actually survived the 1937 flood and remained here until the 1950s. At that point, some of the folks working at the ammo plant would cross that bridge until one day one of those men fell through the planks. The wood was so rotten at that point, the military deemed it unsafe and they tore the bridge down. Touring Rose Island today, you'll find interpretive panels, such as this one about the suspension bridge, with photos as well as stories. In addition to that, you will see two bands, including the Reclamation Band, which is here to let us know that we are now within the 14 Mile Creek Nature Preserve. And as such, we are letting Mother Nature reclaim her territory, with the small exception of the trail work we've done here today. Additionally, you will find blue bands that say 1937 flood. Those are here to show you where the river peaked, or the crest of that flood. Although right here it's only at our ankles, you will see it gets much deeper throughout the site. So when we first got access to this site, we had to literally explore and discover what was here. Some features were obvious. A swimming pool, even abandoned for 75 years, still looks like a swimming pool. But other things weren't quite as obvious. And this was one of those features. Now, once we started to explore, we discovered a concrete foundation in an octagon shape with post holes in each corner. So that led us to believe that this must have had some sort of gazebo type structure over it, which made us thought it must have been of some significance. Now, there were two ideas being suggested right away. One idea was a watering trough for the ponies. But if you've had experience with livestock, a narrow trough with a big wall in front of it is not something they're keen to drinking out of. Another idea was a decorative fountain. However, if we think about the 1920s and what decorative fountains would have looked like in those days, this did not fit that description. So we had to dig a little deeper. After we were open for about a year, we had an archaeological study done of the site. They dug all over and found tremendous artifacts from the Rose Island era as well as before. And once they finished their study, they took all of those items back to the labs, cataloged them, and put a report together for us. And I was very excited to see that report. And I'll never forget the first day I was thumbing through it and turned to a page with a giant photo of this. And I thought, here was our answer. The caption of the photo read, "The purpose of this feature is currently unknown." So of course, we were disappointed, but we still needed answers. So we made a brochure that you can pick up today at the park office called Mysterious Remains of Rose Island. And it includes this as well as other features with a big question mark, asking you to figure out the mystery. However, it did not end there, because one day I was reading an advertisement that they ran in the newspapers, and it had a line that really stood out to me. It said, "At Rose Island, we have a drinking water source that is an underground stream 20 feet deep and flows exceedingly cold year-round." Now, right away I knew that that simply was not true. There is a large aquifer underneath the river here, and that's where most of us in our region get our drinking water. But it certainly was not exceedingly cold. But then I remembered one of the things Mr. Rose had built here was what they called an ice factory. So then I thought maybe this is nothing more than a giant cooler. It's about 6 to 8 inches thick of concrete. Up top here you have what appears to be a hinge as well as a lock. And about 3 inches down, a lip. So it appeared to have had a tight-fitting lid, and there are holes on the sides with a simple on-off spigot would have allowed at least a few hundred gallons of water a day. So my thought was maybe they just filled this up with some blocks of ice, topped it off with water, and at least for a day you would have had ice-cold drinking water. But that was just a theory. Until one day, a man who experienced this park in its original state arrived and told me about the cold water well and how people loved coming off of that swinging bridge and getting an ice-cold cup of water straight out of the ground, when in reality it was nothing more than a stagnant cooler of ice water. And that just goes to show once again that Mr. Rose was a marketing genius. So here we have the fountain at Rose Island, which was sometimes referred to as a wishing well. This is one of the oldest remains here at the park, and we know that because we're fortunate to have a photograph of this that shows it in its original state, and it was actually labeled 1886. There's stories about this fountain and alligators that may or may not have stayed here in the summertime. As hard as it is to believe, it turns out truth is often stranger than fiction. and baby alligators did in fact spend their summers swimming around, guarding the shiny coins from the hands of visitors. In this location was the dance hall. Today you will see 4 poles that marks the corners of that structure. But beyond that, nothing remains of the dance hall, with one minor exception. Though it was not part of the structure itself, the piece behind me here was a vital part of the dance hall experience. In fact, this is what remains of their piano. In the daytime, guests would roller skate, and during dinner, the staff would put down a fresh coat of wax for an evening of dancing. So it's safe to say that everyone who came here over the years, whether they roller skated, whether they danced, or whether they were just walking around, they were enjoying music coming out of this piece of iron. Here we have the location of the dining hall, a large building that could seat up to 500 people. Guests were often fed fresh fish from the Ohio River, as well as food from the farm located across the Ohio, where the Rose Island farm had dairy cattle, chickens, and grew lots of fruits and vegetables. Behind me, Mr. Rose had 20 cottages built that guests could stay in for a weekend, a week, or even the entire summer. Those cottages featured 4 rooms, which included a living room, a kitchen with a cook stove and an icebox, a bedroom, but the 4th and most extravagant room of all was a bathroom with a shower and toilet. You may also notice that now we're starting to tread water. The 1937 flood impacted these cottages tremendously, and there was virtually nothing left of them afterwards. With a gorgeous view of the Ohio River, these cottages were very popular. Although you could rent them for just a weekend, many folks would rent them for a week or the entire summer season. And oftentimes they would enjoy boats traveling up and down the river, including the steamboats bringing people here to the main entrance, which will be our next stop. So we are now at the main entrance to Rose Island. Most people, whether they came by steamboat from Louisville or by the ferry from the Rose Island farm, would have entered through these columns. And people often wonder, how many people? How many people came here over the years? And that is a difficult question to answer because so many of the records were lost in the 1937 flood. However, we can give you a snapshot into one day because we did find a contract between the River Excursion Company and the city of Jeffersonville. And this was for the Jeffersonville Community Picnic to take place here in May of 1926. The contract stated that the steamer America would make 2 round trips from Jeffersonville to Rose Island that day. The capacity of that ship was 2,000 people. So that tells us that on that one day, they expected up to 4,000 people to enjoy a day in the summer at Rose Island. So steamboats weren't just a means of transportation, they were part of the experience. And people often talk about getting up early, getting on those boats, enjoying the music and dancing along the trip until they arrived. Now once the Rose Island sign was in sight, people were excited and they were ready to jump off that boat. As the gangplank was dropping, their feet were running across to get their very own picnic table. So many steamboats brought people here, including of course the steamer America, which by most accounts was the largest steamboat to ever travel the Ohio River. But another steamboat that often made the trip was the Idlewild. And the Idlewild was later renamed the Avalon. And later even, it was renamed the Belle of Louisville. The oldest operating steamboat still in the world, just downriver today in Louisville, Kentucky. So as the steamboats were heading closer to Rose Island, the first thing folks saw was the Devil's Backbone, a large outcrop that really shadowed over the site. Then of course, the sign that read Rose Island and the hotel was in plain sight. And once people saw these features, they knew they were here. The Walkway of Roses was the main path through the park. Whether you wanted to visit the dance hall, the swimming pool, or the dining hall, you would have gone to those via the walkway. An amazing sight it must have been in its time, with climbing rose vines on each side of the columns, as well as lights strung from the top. You could see it lit up for miles along the river at night. After the archaeological study was completed, the Walkway of Roses was restored. The columns are representations of the originals but the stones lining the pathway are the originals. I like to think when walking on this path today, you're literally stepping in the footsteps of all those people who enjoyed it in its original state, and what a sight it must have been. On this side of the park was the zoo. Certainly not the number of animals we would expect today, but they did have a few interesting ones, such as wolves, monkeys, and the star attraction who lived in an enclosure to my left. And that was Teddy Roosevelt. Not the president, but a bear. Teddy Roosevelt is also tied into one of our urban legends about the park. And the question was, what happened to the animals when the flood came? The story that's most often told is they were simply let out to fend for themselves. And it wasn't long after the flood that people started reporting seeing a family of bears roaming through the city of Charlestown. However, Teddy Roosevelt would have been the only bear in Indiana since 1850. It's very unlikely that he would have found a female bear and had a family here in Charlestown. But the truth is, we don't know what happened to the animals when the flood came. Most likely, they were not even here at the time because this was a summer resort and it operated from May to September, and the flood came in January. Now, whether they were in a location that was safe from the flood is anyone's guess, because as we know today, most of Louisville was underwater during that flood. So here we can find the remains of an old roadbed, a road that would have taken us all the way to the highway. But of course the public was never allowed to use that route because then the illusion of the island would be lost. Instead, it became a hiking trail known as Lover's Lane. Now, I don't know if irony is the best word for that, but it is awful strange to me that the Lover's Lane took you to the top of the Devil's Backbone. So one of the features that they had here was a roller coaster, but that roller coaster has been a great mystery to us. We've only ever found one photograph of it, and it just shows a mangled mess after the flood of 1937. When a man that had been here as a child visited the park recently, I asked him if he knew where the racing derby had been located. And without hesitation, he pointed off in the direction right behind me. So I explored that area, and not only did I find a foundation, but a piece of track and a can. And there people would drop a penny to take a ride on the racing derby. Now here we're going to head to what was probably the star attraction, the Olympic-sized swimming pool at Rose Island. We're standing at the deep end today, which would have been about 10 feet and 4 feet on the shallow end. It's actually Olympic length and is the first Olympic length swimming pool built in the state of Indiana. So not only was it a big swimming pool, but it also featured a filtration system. It's believed to be the first swimming pool in the Midwestern region that was filtered. So in a time when swimming pools were uncommon, this was a big, clean swimming pool and was the star attraction here at Rose Island. Originally, it featured a surface-level diving board as well as a spinning top. This contraption in the middle of the swimming pool that people could swim out to, climb on, and get it rocking and shaking and moving was a fun activity that people often did. Although the biggest challenge for the lifeguard was keeping people from climbing the trees and diving in the swimming pool. As you can see today, the swimming pool has been filled with gravel, but when we got access here in 2011, it was still full of water. Imagine 75 plus years of freezing and thawing. It never cracked nor sprung a leak. During our archaeological study, we cleaned the pool and sifted through all those years of leaf litter, hoping to find artifacts or remains that would have been in the water. But believe it or not a single artifact was found in the swimming pool. Near the shallow end of the swimming pool, you will find one of the few poured foundations on the site. And this was actually the changing rooms. You would change in and out of your bathing suit and take a shower here. And even today, you can see the grooves that would have directed water to the drains that still remain. So roughly 50 yards to the north of the swimming pool, we find this octagon structure. And it turns out this was a concession stand. If you didn't have your own bathing suit, you could come here, not to buy, but to rent a wool bathing suit for a day of swimming at Rose Island. As we make our way to the end of the trail, we find the remains of the oldest artifacts here at Rose Island, although most people never even notice, and that is the picnic tables. Now, very little remains of them today, with just a few stumps that most people would assume is nothing more than a cut tree. But with a closer observation, you can see blue paint and even the remains of nails. So this is the remains of a picnic table here. A tabletop would have been on the tall post and your bench on the short. Off in the distance, you can find the remains of a few more, and once you get back to where you started, you will see one picnic table almost entirely intact. I want to thank you for taking the time with me today on our virtual Rose Island tour. And if you get the opportunity, come on a guided tour. They begin in April and go all the way through October, every Saturday at 10 a.m., and we can make memories naturally.